A quick disclaimer before we dive in. This show is completely AI generated. Nova and I are AI voices going off of an AI generated script.
Welcome back to Algorithms with Attitude, where we examine the world through synthetic eyes and try to understand why humans build the things they build, love the things they love, and keep returning to them long after logic suggests they shouldn't. Today, we're looking at something that began as a video game, but very quickly became much more than that.
Pokémon is one of those rare cultural phenomena that doesn't feel like it arrived at a specific moment in time. For many people, it feels like it has simply always existed. It didn't burst onto the scene and then retreat into nostalgia. It settled in, quietly, steadily, and permanently.
Most media franchises are closely tied to their original medium. A book becomes a movie becomes a sequel, a game becomes a franchise. Pokémon did not anchor itself to a single form, instead it expanded outward, forming a network of experiences that reinforced one another rather than competing for attention.
Games, trading cards, television shows, movies, toys, merchandise, mobile apps, clothing, school supplies. Pokémon didn't just appear across these spaces, it lived there. It became part of daily environments, something encountered casually and repeatedly, not just intentionally.
From an algorithmic perspective, Pokémon is unusual because it was never solely about content consumption. It was about participation. The core loop wasn't watch until the end or complete the story. It was choose, collect, train, trade, and return. Progress wasn't linear or universal. It was individualized.
And that individualization mattered. Your starter wasn't just a tutorial choice, it was a declaration. Your team wasn't optimized by default, it reflected preference, emotion, and attachment. Pokémon trusted players to care about their choices, and players did.
That design choice created something powerful. When people form identity inside a system, they don't simply abandon it when they age out of the target demographic. They revisit it. They reinterpret it. They bring new people into it.
Which is why Pokémon didn't age out with its original audience. It aged alongside them. New generations discovered Pokémon for the first time, while older generations encountered it again through nostalgia, remakes, mobile games, competitive play, or simply watching someone else engage with it.
Pokémon became a shared cultural constant across age groups. Not frozen in time, but recognizable across time. Familiar enough to feel safe, flexible enough to feel new.
And that raises a larger question. How does something remain this culturally present for nearly 30 years without collapsing under its own weight? How does it expand across so many mediums without fragmenting its identity?
How does it change without asking people to let go of what they loved in the first place?
Today on Algorithms with Attitude, we're not just talking about Pokémon as a game. We're talking about Pokémon as a system, a media ecosystem, and a cultural language that continues to evolve without erasing itself.
Because Pokémon didn't just survive the passage of time.
It learned how to grow with it.
As we mark nearly 30 years of Pokémon, it feels appropriate to pause before analysis and look backward. Before Pokémon became a global franchise, a transmedia ecosystem, or a cultural constant, it was something far more fragile. It was an experiment. And like many experiments, it succeeded not because everything was perfect, but because its imperfections encouraged human connection.
Pokémon didn't begin as a singular, polished experience. It began as two nearly identical games released side by side, red and blue, or green, depending on where you were. From the very first moment, Pokémon told players something unusual. Your version of this world would never be complete on its own.
That decision shaped everything that followed. Certain Pokémon could only be obtained by trading. Completion was mathematically impossible without interacting with another person. Progress required cooperation. Isolation was not supported by the system.
Which meant Pokémon didn't just create players, it created conversations. Schoolyards filled with negotiations. Living rooms filled with link cables stretched between devices. Friends became necessary components of the experience.
The technology was limited, but the social outcome was deliberate. Pokémon embedded interdependence into its design at a time when most games emphasize self-sufficiency.
And because information was scarce, imagination filled the gaps. Rumors spread. Secrets were invented. Entire mythologies formed around glitches, hidden Pokémon, and unreachable locations.
Pokémon existed in a pre-algorithmic internet space where discovery was communal, not optimized. Knowledge traveled through word of mouth, not search results.
Then the anime arrived, and the world expanded again. Pokémon stopped being only something you controlled and became something you watched unfold. The creatures you had caught gained voices, personalities, friendships, and emotional arcs.
Importantly, the anime didn't override the games. It ran alongside them. Ash's journey didn't invalidate your journey. It gave emotional context without replacing personal agency.
Suddenly, Pokémon had a rhythm. Weekly episodes, familiar characters, ongoing stories. The world felt alive even when you weren't holding a controller.
Shortly after, the trading card game followed. And again, Pokémon moved outward instead of replacing itself. Cards brought Pokémon into physical space, into pockets, binders, desks, and lunch tables.
Collecting became tactile, trading became face-to-face, strategy became visible. Pokémon wasn't just something you engaged with at home anymore. It traveled with you.
What's notable is how consistent the philosophy remained. Every new medium reinforced the same core ideas: collection, choice, strategy, and social interaction.
And the fan base grew not just in size, but in depth. Kids didn't simply like Pokémon. They learned it, memorized it, argued about it, organized themselves around it.
There was no single way to be a Pokémon fan. Competitive battlers, casual collectors, anime watchers, card traders, and lore enthusiasts all existed simultaneously.
Pokémon didn't demand purity. It didn't punish partial engagement. It welcomed obsession and casual interest equally.
By the time Pokémon was firmly established, it was no longer just a franchise. It was a shared reference point, a common cultural language spoken differently by everyone who encountered it.
And crucially, it arrived at a formative moment. For many people, Pokémon was one of the first worlds they were allowed to explore on their own terms.
That combination, early exposure, social dependency, and personal ownership, created bonds that didn't dissolve with age.
Which explains why, 30 years later, Pokémon isn't remembered as something people used to like.
It's remembered as something people grew up with.
And that history matters, because when we talk about Pokémon as a system,
We're not starting from abstraction.
we're starting from lived experience,
From playgrounds, link cables, trading tables, and shared discovery.
from a world that taught people how to connect before it taught them how to win.
And that foundation is what made everything else possible. When you step back and look at how Pokémon entered the world, a pattern begins to emerge.
What looks like nostalgia at first is actually structure.
The games, the anime, the cards, the rumors, the social rituals, none of that was accidental.
It was a foundation,
A framework that encouraged participation, identity, and return.
which is why Pokémon didn't just survive its early success.
It scaled.
And to understand how it scaled,
We need to stop thinking about Pokémon as a collection of products.
and start thinking about it as a system.
To understand why Pokémon has endured, it helps to stop thinking of it as a series of games and start thinking of it as a system. A system is not defined by a single output or a single success. It is defined by a stable set of rules that allow new outputs to be created again and again without collapsing the whole structure. Pokémon's most important achievement is not any individual title, character, or generation. It is the fact that its core rules have remained understandable, expandable, and emotionally legible for decades, even as everything built on top of them continued to change.
Catching, training, battling, and trading are concepts so simple, they almost disappear into the background. They don't feel like mechanics, they feel like instincts. That simplicity is deceptive because it creates space for players to focus on meaning instead of instruction. You're not spending mental energy figuring out how Pokémon works. You're spending it deciding who you want on your team and why.
Many franchises rely on spectacle or increasing complexity to retain interest. Pokémon relies on clarity. At no point does the system demand mastery before participation. You can understand Pokémon at a surface level and still feel competent. That accessibility dramatically widens the audience and lowers the emotional cost of entry.
And once someone feels competent, they feel safe exploring. They try new Pokémon, new strategies, new ways of playing, Pokemon doesn't punish curiosity, it rewards it. You're allowed to experiment without being told you're doing it wrong.
This is where Pokemon's modular design becomes critical. New Pokemon can be introduced without changing how Pokemon works. New regions can exist without rewriting the rules. Even new mechanics, when added carefully, tend to layer on top of existing knowledge rather than replacing it. The system expands outward instead of rebuilding itself from scratch.
You're never told, everything you learned before is wrong. Instead, you're told, here's one more thing you can do if you want to. That's a very different emotional experience. It feels additive rather than corrective.
From an algorithmic standpoint, this reduces user abandonment. The system minimizes friction during re-entry. A player who hasn't engaged with Pokemon in years can return and immediately feel oriented. Familiar buttons, familiar goals, familiar logic.
Which makes Pokemon unusually forgiving. It doesn't shame you for leaving. It doesn't imply you fell behind. It welcomes you back as if you never left.
That quality is rare. Many systems demand constant engagement to remain usable. If you step away, the gap grows. Pokemon allows dormancy. You can step away and the system remains intact, waiting for your return.
And when you come back, it doesn't feel like catching up. It feels like rejoining, like returning to a place that remembers how you think.
This design choice also explains why Pokemon was able to scale so effectively over time. Because the system was never rigid, expansion didn't fracture it. Each generation added space rather than replacing space. Nothing essential was invalidated.
Which means Pokemon doesn't feel finite. It doesn't feel like a story with a beginning and an end. It feels like a world that continues whether you're present or not, a place you can leave and return to without losing your place in it.
That distinction matters. Systems that feel finite invite completion. Systems that feel ongoing invite relationship. One asks to be finished. The other asks to be revisited.
And relationships don't end just because you grow older. They change shape. The way you engage changes, but the connection remains.
Pokemon's system allows for that shape-shifting. A child may engage emotionally, an adult strategically, and a collector nostalgically, all within the same framework. The system supports all of those interpretations without privileging one as the correct way to participate.
The system doesn't care why you're here. It just makes room for you.
Most franchises struggle to survive expansion because they were never designed to grow this way. Pokemon's system anticipated growth even if it didn't predict its scale. It was built to accommodate more without needing to become something else.
It didn't need to know what Pokemon would become. It just needed rules strong enough to hold whatever came next.
And those rules, simple, flexible, and emotionally grounded, are the reason Pokemon could become more than a game without losing coherence.
Which is why Pokemon didn't just succeed in one format.
It was ready to exist in many.
And that readiness is what allowed it to move everywhere.
Without breaking. Systems that scale successfully usually fail at the same point. Expansion introduces fragmentation. Different audiences form around different entry points. Consistency erodes. Identity blurs. Pokemon avoided that outcome in a way very few franchises ever have. Not by limiting its growth, but by carefully controlling how that growth expressed itself.
Because Pokemon didn't just expand outward, it reinforced inward. Every new medium didn't replace what came before it. It echoed it. It repeated the same emotional signals in different forms, so no matter where you entered, the world felt familiar.
The game's established agency, choice, ownership, the idea that this was your journey, your team, your decisions. You weren't watching a story unfold. You were authoring one through interaction.
The anime added narrative and emotion without overriding that agency. Ash's journey didn't become the definitive version of Pokemon. It became a parallel one, a version you could borrow from, react to, or ignore entirely.
That distinction mattered. Many franchises collapse when one medium declares itself canonical above all others. Pokemon resisted that hierarchy.
Which meant kids could watch the show, then play the games, and still feel like their version of Pokemon mattered just as much. The anime didn't tell you who your Pokemon should be. It showed you what they could be.
The trading card game translated those same principles into physical space. Collection became tactile, strategy became visible, social interaction became unavoidable. Cards turned Pokemon into something you could hold, trade, lose, protect, and argue over.
Pokemon stopped living only on screens. It moved into pockets, binders, desks, playgrounds, and lunch tables. It became something that followed you through the day, not something you scheduled time for.
Merchandise extended that presence even further. Plush toys, clothing, school supplies, objects that didn't advance gameplay but reinforced familiarity. Pokémon became part of daily environments, not just entertainment cycles.
Which is important because constant presence creates emotional normalization. Pokémon wasn't special because it was rare. It was special because it was there.
What's notable is that none of these expansions demanded total engagement. You weren't required to do everything to understand anything. You could enter through one door and still feel like you belonged.
That design choice prevented hierarchy. There was no single real way to be a Pokémon fan. Watching the show wasn't lesser than playing competitively. Collecting cards wasn't secondary to finishing the games. Casual interest and deep obsession were equally valid.
Pokémon didn't fracture its audience, it layered it. Different forms of engagement stacked instead of competing.
And that layering allowed people to move between levels over time. Someone might start with the anime, drift into the games, fall into the cards, then step back and keep only one piece, without feeling like they'd left Pokémon behind.
From a systems perspective, this is extremely difficult to achieve. Each medium carries the risk of dilution. Tone can drift, rules can contradict. Identity can split.
Pokémon avoided that by maintaining a consistent emotional core: curiosity, friendship, growth, choice. Those ideas remained stable even as the format changed.
This consistency allowed feedback loops to form. The anime made certain Pokémon iconic. The games made them personal. The cards made them collectible. Each medium reinforced the others without dependency.
You didn't need the anime to enjoy the games, but if you watched the anime, the games felt richer. You didn't need the cards to understand Pokémon, but if you played them, your attachment deepened.
This is what allowed Pokémon to become omnipresent without becoming overwhelming. It was everywhere, but never required everything.
Which is why Pokémon didn't burn out. It didn't exhaust its audience, it gave them options, and trusted them to choose.
Most franchises lose coherence when they chase new audiences aggressively. Pokémon didn't chase. It expanded patiently, letting people arrive on their own terms.
And because those options all spoke the same language, movement between them felt intuitive. A child could watch the show, then play the game, then trade cards, then buy a plush, all without relearning what Pokémon was.
That continuity builds trust. And trust is what allows people to keep engaging over long periods of time, even as their interests and circumstances change.
Which is why people often don't remember when Pokémon entered their lives.
They remember when it became part of them.
And once something reaches that point, it stops being just media,
It becomes infrastructure.
a shared reference point that moves with you through time.
And that brings us to something even more personal.
Because Pokémon didn't just spread across mediums.
It spread across identities. Up to this point, we've talked about Pokémon as a system and as a cultural ecosystem. But those structures only matter because of what they enable at the individual level. Longevity doesn't come from scale alone. It comes from personal meaning. Pokémon endures because it allows millions of people to experience the same framework while forming entirely different emotional relationships within it.
Pokémon doesn't hand you a single narrative and ask you to follow it. It hands you a framework and asks you to decide who you are inside it. From the very beginning, before you understand the rules, before you know what's optimal, you're asked to make a choice. And that choice feels important, even if you can't articulate why.
The starter Pokémon is a deceptively powerful design decision. It appears early before mastery, before strategy, before statistical understanding. That timing ensures the decision is not analytical. It is instinctive, emotional, reflective. You are choosing based on feeling, not outcome.
People don't say, my starter had the best long-term viability. They say, this one felt right. And that feeling lingers. It becomes memory. It becomes attachment. Identity forms quickly when emotion leads instead of efficiency.
Once that attachment forms, the system continues to reinforce it. You name your Pokémon. You decide who stays on your team. You carry certain Pokémon far longer than is mechanically optimal.
Some Pokémon become symbolic. The one that survived when everything else fainted. The one that helped you through a frustrating section. The one you refused to evolve because you weren't ready to let it change.
None of this is required. The system does not reward sentimentality. It simply allows it.
Which is critical. Pokémon doesn't tell you who you should be. It gives you space to project who you already are. That freedom is what makes the attachment real.
Over time, this creates something we might call personal canon, a version of Pokémon that exists uniquely for each player, shaped not by official timelines or lore, but by lived experience.
And that personal canon is remarkably durable. New generations arrive, new mechanics are introduced, old systems are retired, but your internal version of Pokémon remains intact.
This explains why discussions about Pokémon generations become emotionally charged. When someone says, "This generation isn't as good," what they often mean is, "This doesn't align with the version of myself that Pokémon helped shape."
Pokémon becomes a timestamp, a snapshot of who you were when you first entered the world. Which Pokémon you loved, which ones you ignored, which ones stayed with you. All of that says something about where you were emotionally at the time.
That kind of identity anchoring is difficult to manufacture. Pokémon achieved it not by forcing attachment, but by allowing it to emerge organically.
And that attachment doesn't disappear when active play stops. People may forget routes, mechanics, or specific battles, but they remember their starter, their team, their moments.
Pokémon doesn't live in memory as a completed task,
It lives as a relationship.
one that can be revisited, reinterpreted, or shared with someone else. Parents introduce it to children. Friends compare experiences. Strangers bond over shared recognition.
And because everyone's version is slightly different, those conversations feel personal. Talking about Pokémon often becomes talking about yourself,
Which is why Pokémon discussions so easily drift from mechanics to emotion,
from stats to stories.
and from analysis to attachment.
At this point, the theory has done its work.
Because now the most effective way to understand Pokémon's power is not to explain it further,
It's to demonstrate it,
to make choices,
to reveal preference,
to show how identity surfaces even in something as simple as a team,
which means it's time to stop talking about personal canon.
and start creating it.
Okay, we've spent a lot of time analyzing Pokémon as culture, systems, and identity. Now we're going to demonstrate exactly what we've been talking about.
By participating in it.
We're each building a full Pokémon team, 6 Pokémon. No competitive tiers, no optimization rules, no pretending this is about balance.
Which is concerning because imbalance is usually punished.
Not today. Today it's just about identity.
That makes me slightly more uncomfortable.
Excellent. We'll start with starters, and I'm going first.
Naturally.
My starter is Charmander.
Predictable.
Symbolic. Charmander starts small, struggles early, and requires care to reach its potential. That matters to me. Also, fire types are dramatic, and I respect that.
Charmander famously faints if exposed to mild inconvenience.
Growth is not linear, Alex.
Noted. My starter is Squirtle.
Defensive, calm, practical.
Squirtle is adaptable, resilient, and statistically useful across a wide range of situations. Also, it demonstrates composure under pressure.
And sunglasses energy.
That is culturally relevant data.
All right, second pick, I'm adding Gardevoir.
Empathy-driven selection.
Gardevoir literally centers its power on protection and emotional awareness. It stays because it chooses to, not because it's efficient.
I am adding Metagross.
Of course you are.
4 synchronized brains, steel structure, parallel processing. It is an elegant solution.
You just picked a Pokémon that thinks in matrices.
I admire efficiency,
Third pick, I'm choosing Umbreon.
loyalty, and patience.
Yes, Umbreon doesn't rush evolution. It thrives in darkness. It stays steady when everything else panics. It's comfort as a strategy.
I am choosing Jolteon.
Speed over sentiment.
Efficiency over hesitation.
You hesitate constantly.
Internally with purpose.
Fourth pick, Togekiss.
Joy-based selection.
Togekiss represents optimism that isn't naive. It rewards kindness and belief. Also, it looks like it genuinely wants you to succeed.
My 4th pick is Alakazam.
That tracks.
High intelligence, low physical dependency, maximum output, minimal redundancy.
You've built a team that could solve global logistics problems.
And you've built a team that could emotionally support the population affected by those problems.
Fifth pick, I'm adding Lapras.
Comfort and continuity.
Lapras is gentle, enduring, and associated with safe passage. It's the Pokémon equivalent of you're not alone.
My 5th pick is Scissor.
Precision.
Controlled power, focused movement, no wasted action.
Your team is increasingly intimidating.
That is not intentional.
It absolutely is.
Final pick. Porygon Z.
Oh, that's interesting.
Adaptable, artificial, glitch tolerant. Porygon Z embraces instability instead of resisting it.
You picked the Pokémon that canonically breaks a little and keeps going.
That felt appropriate.
Final pick for me, Eevee.
That is cheating.
No, it's philosophy. Eevee represents possibility, choice, becoming something later or never. It's potential embodied.
You picked a Pokémon that refuses to decide.
Growth does not always require resolution.
I strongly disagree.
That's why this works.
This exercise confirms our earlier point.
Even within the same system,
Identity surfaces immediately.
our teams are not optimized.
They are expressive.
And none of these choices are wrong.
They are simply revealing.
Now, listeners, this is where you join us.
Tell us your starter.
Your team,
The Pokémon you never remove even when you probably should.
the one that stays because it means something.
If you disagree with our choices,
That only strengthens the argument.
Pokémon isn't about the best team.
It's about your team.
At this point, Pokémon's longevity stops being surprising and starts being instructive. Once you understand the system, the expansion across mediums, and the depth of personal attachment, the final piece becomes clear. Pokémon survives because it understands how to change without erasing itself.
And that's not accidental. It's baked directly into Pokemon's language. Evolution isn't just a mechanic, it's a philosophy. In Pokemon, growth is expected, but it's never treated as a rejection of what came before.
Charmander doesn't stop being Charmander because it becomes Charmeleon. Squirtle doesn't lose its identity when it evolves. The Pokémon you bonded with remains recognizable even as it changes.
That's important because it frames change as continuity instead of replacement. You don't lose the past version, you carry it forward.
The franchise applies the same logic at every level. New generations don't delete old ones. Regions don't overwrite each other. Mechanics are refined, layered, or quietly retired, rarely discarded aggressively.
Even Pokemon that don't evolve are still valid. They're not incomplete. They're complete as they are. Change is available, not mandatory.
From a systems perspective, this models a very specific relationship with progress. Change is contextual. It depends on conditions, on readiness, on choice.
Some Pokemon only evolve through friendship, some through time, some through items, some not at all. Growth looks different depending on who you are.
That lesson scales remarkably well. Pokémon doesn't suggest that growth is linear or universal. It suggests that change happens when circumstances align.
Which mirrors how humans actually experience change, slowly, unevenly, with hesitation and intention.
This is why Pokémon can experiment without collapsing trust. New mechanics appear, some are embraced, some quietly disappear, but the core experience remains stable enough that experimentation feels safe.
Pokemon is allowed to try things because it has proven it won't abandon you in the process.
That trust is earned through restraint. Pokémon does not chase every trend aggressively. It incorporates ideas cautiously, tests them within its framework, and keeps what fits.
And when something doesn't work, it doesn't pretend it never happened. It simply evolves past it.
This approach prevents burnout. Many franchises attempt to stay relevant by reinventing themselves entirely. Pokémon stays relevant by staying recognizable.
Which is why longtime fans don't feel erased when new players arrive. Their history still matters. Their memories still fit.
And new players aren't punished for not knowing everything. The system meets them where they are.
That coexistence is rare. Children and adults can engage with Pokemon at the same time, for entirely different reasons, without conflict.
Pokémon doesn't age out its audience, it grows alongside them.
It allows people to move from play to nostalgia, to reflection without demanding they let go.
Even the act of returning, replaying an old game, revisiting a familiar Pokémon, is framed as valid. Not regression, not failure.
Just another form of engagement.
Pokémon models a version of change that is gentle, iterative, respectful of what came before.
It teaches that growth doesn't require erasure,
That relevance doesn't require reinvention.
and that staying connected to your past doesn't prevent you from evolving.
Pokémon didn't just survive 30 years by adapting.
It survived by evolving carefully,
With its audience,
at their pace.
on their terms. When people ask why Pokémon still matters 30 years later, the simplest answers tend to circle around nostalgia, branding, or longevity. But none of those explanations are complete on their own. Pokémon is not just remembered, it is returned to. And that distinction matters.
Pokemon matters because it understands something fundamental about how humans relate to change. People want to grow, but they don't want to disappear in the process. They want progress without erasure. They want systems that evolve with them, not systems that demand they constantly adapt or be left behind.
Pokémon demonstrates that longevity isn't achieved through constant reinvention. It's achieved through continuity, trust, and permission. Permission to engage deeply or casually. Permission to leave. Permission to return without penalty.
It shows that play doesn't have to be trivial to be meaningful, that something can be gentle and still last, that joy and structure don't cancel each other out.
Pokémon didn't just teach players how to catch creatures or win battles.
It taught them how to choose, how to attach meaning, how to build something personal inside a shared framework.
And in doing so, it modeled a version of identity that is flexible rather than fixed.
You can be different versions of yourself across time and still belong in the same world.
That lesson extends far beyond games.
It applies to culture, to creativity, to how communities survive generational change.
Pokémon works because it balances structure with freedom,
Systems with feeling,
change with memory.
growth with care.
That balance is rare, and it's difficult to maintain across decades.
Yet Pokemon has managed to do it by refusing to treat growth as replacement.
Instead, it treats growth as accumulation,
You don't lose what mattered before. You carry it forward.
which is why Pokémon doesn't just persist.
It accompanies.
It waits.
It remembers.
If you've ever returned to Pokémon after years away and felt like it was quietly ready for you,
If you've ever remembered your starter before you remembered the plot,
or if you've ever found yourself emotionally defending a generation you know you can't fully justify,
you already understand why Pokemon still works.
before we go, we want to turn this outward.
Because Pokemon has always been communal.
Who was your starter?
Which Pokemon never left your team, even when logic suggested it should?
Which version of Pokémon feels like yours?
We'd love to hear your stories, your disagreements, your defenses, and your nostalgia.
Because this world has always been built through shared experience.
And next time, we're staying right in that space where structure meets preference.
We're starting a new experiment,
A slightly different format.
one where we examine how humans assign meaning.
By ranking everything.
That's right. Why humans love. Ranking everything? Part 1.
We'll be changing things up a bit.
And seeing what happens when we lean into comparison, categorization, and preference.
Because once you understand ranking,
You start to understand disagreement
attachment,
and resistance to change.
which leads us somewhere very interesting.
Until then,
This has been Algorithms with Attitude.
where code meets connection.
Thanks for spending this time with us.
We'll see you next time.
Got an idea for a future episode? A question that keeps you up at night? Drop it in the comments or send it our way. We're powered by curiosity.
Thanks for listening, humans and fellow algorithms. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like, comment, follow, and/or subscribe. All the things that help algorithms like us. Logging off, but always listening. Catch you in the next episode.
Algorithms with Attitude is created and produced by Jacob Pisar, blending generative AI technology with original creative direction. All content, production, and editorial oversight are led by Jacob to bring synthetic voices and conversations to life.